What's up?
What's up?
Right, well, it's time for part 3, and I've filmed loads of stuff for this episode. However, throughout the weeks I've been filming, it's been a bit disjointed, so it's hard for me to remember where I filmed and what bits I filmed. But I'm going to use some of the footage, probably chuck it over the top of me talking, which is interesting. So I'm going to go through what I've done, and the first and most obvious thing is this is now painted. So this is the base. This was painted using just an art supplies metal paint, and also the shelf is now in the bottom, so I'll show you that. So as you can see, I've cut a shelf in the bottom there, and that is a real good fit in there. All that was needed was for the corners to be notched around the frame legs, and that was also painted in just some old paint I'd lying around. Luckily it sort of matches the colour scheme I wanted, so that's done. Anyway, all I had to do was sand the edges off just to give it a bit more of a cleaner look, and that's pretty much as far as the frame goes. Now there's other little bits for the frame. I did document this in one of the videos, but I'm going to go through it right now just so I can keep this all as one. So this picture's a bit upside down and inside out, but if you have a look there, we've got the main frame, and then this is what I call the gantry frame. So this is where all the linear motion components are going to sit, as in linear rails and then the rack and pinion. So here is a finished mock-up of a gantry plate. So this is actually going to sit this way up on the side. It won't stay up. It's going to sit on the side of our frame, and the gantry is going to be supported by these gantry plates. They've got countersunk holes at the top which are going to match our gantry beam, which is over here. Grab that. So I've mocked one up on there already, and I've countersunk the holes just to want it to look nice. This is a 3D printed gantry end plate. There's another one there for the other side, and then that one there I've just mocked up on the linear rails just to see how it sort of sits. I was going to go with the high wind rails because they're square and they don't have this motion, but I'm not too worried about this motion being at play, because once it's attached to the gantry itself, the actual gantry beam, there's no movement in that direction, so that'll brace that up. And there's I think 6 holes in there. So this gantry beam is from Ooznest. It's just their C profile beam with the V slot set up in the middle, and that also has enabled me to have a nice shallow mount for the Z-axis motion components. So this is fully ready to be mounted. I've got these end plates coming from a company called Laser Master, who's cut some bits for me before. They seem very reasonable. I'll run through pricing in a bit. And yeah, so we're going to mock up with these. The bits I've got to do now is, obviously we've got rack and pinion to go on the bottom. the rack is down there in that long tube. So what I've got to do is I've got to cut that on the bandsaw, and it's got to be mounted onto the underside of here. Just to run through what I did film, but I'm probably not going to use the footage because I was feeling really boring yesterday. What I did with this was I put the rail on top of both of these, which are the gantry side frames. I clamped them together, transferred all my marks across so they're all the same. Obviously I checked that the rail holes are in the same place on both rails. Drilled the holes, so these holes are 4.3mm, and then tapped with an M5 tap from here, and that allowed me to mount these on with these socket cap bolts, and they just fit so nice and it worked really well. I did check this on the drawing prior to doing that, but it just means I feel like I've done a more professional job tapping these holes. I didn't really know how else to do it. I was going to use self tappers, but I just think it's a bit of a cop out when trying to build something nice and proper. So the colours on this, I've gone with a black anodised gantry beam. I've also gone with, which I haven't showed you, so the Z-axis I mentioned that's going here is actually here. So I've assembled this. It was a bit of a complicated assembly. For some people it probably wouldn't be, but for me I didn't have any instructions, and this isn't really anything I've ever done before. So I had to follow a little video on the Open Builds channel quite loosely to try and get this to work. There's a couple of bits I missed, like in these wheels here, when you put the bearings in, there's actually supposed to be one of these little calibrated shims to go between the bearings, but I can't see any issues with how it's working, so I'm guessing that's just one of those things. If you're really anal, chuck them in there. If you're not, don't. The only other thing I mentioned in the other footage, which we're not using, is when the torch is installed on this, I might need to cut, in fact when a torch is installed on this, I need to offset it so that it clears these sections of this frame, because on top of here I'm due to mount this stepper motor, and I think it's mounted that way. That's that. Probably not making much sense right now. So what I'm going to do is get this rack out of here, which is basically just a geared rack, and I will be cutting it to length to fit these gantry frame rails. So here's the rack itself. All I've got to do now is cut this rack to suit the length of these gantry frames. Right, I'm part way through machining these holes in here, and what I've done, I've just got to stop halfway because I'm actually supposed to be working, believe it or not. So what I've done is I marked out all the holes on the pinion, the rack, and I drilled the two outermost holes so that I could mount them to the frame rails themselves, and then when I drill these intermediate holes, which I've already started, I've piloted those, then I know that they're all going to be in line, because I had a couple of issues with mounting the linear rails on there where I had a couple of bits that wouldn't quite line up. So that's where I'm at now. These are now going to be machined through to completion, and then I'll move on to the attachment to the frame and hopefully get some big progress.